I co-signed one document for my father. It put a loan on my house without my knowledge. The bank manager slid the document across her desk, and I remember thinking how polished the mahogany was. So clean, I could see my own confused expression reflected back at me. Patricia Nguyen had that look on her face, the one professionals wear when they're about to ruin your day but can't show it. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, tapping a line on page 3 with her pen. "This is your signature, correct?" I leaned forward, squinting at the cramped handwriting that was definitely mine, dated 8 months ago. My stomach dropped before my brain even processed why. The document wasn't the refinancing application I'd come here to file. It was a home equity line of credit for $215,000. Money I'd never seen, money I'd never requested, money that was somehow tied to a loan I had absolutely no memory of taking out. I looked up at her, my mouth dry. "I never signed this," I said, knowing even as the words left my mouth how stupid they sounded. But it was my signature, my name, my house. 8 months earlier, I'd been living what I thought was a pretty standard 34-year-old life. Julia and I had been married for 6 years, owned a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs outside Portland, and were talking about starting a family. I worked as an IT project manager for a healthcare software company, pulling decent money, nothing spectacular but stable. My father, Leonard, had always been a bit of a character. Charming, talkative, always working some angle or investment opportunity that never quite panned out. But he was my dad. When he called me on that Wednesday in October and asked if I could help him with some insurance paperwork, I didn't think twice. "It's just a co-signer thing," he'd explained over the phone, his voice warm and casual. "The insurance company needs a family member to verify some information for my life insurance policy. You know how these corporations are. They want everything in triplicate." He laughed, and I laughed with him. He was 71, still sharp, still active. It made sense he'd be updating his policies. We met at a cafe near his condo in Beaverton. He had the papers in a manila folder, already filled out mostly, just needing my signature in a few places. I remember the cafe was crowded, and we sat at a small table near the window. Dad ordered his usual black coffee and a blueberry scone. I had an Americano. He slid the folder across to me, pointing at the highlighted tabs. "Just here, here, and here," he said, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "It's all standard beneficiary designation stuff. You're listed as the secondary, Julia's the primary. Just need you to acknowledge you've reviewed it." I flipped through the pages, dense legal text, insurance jargon, the kind of thing that makes your eyes glaze over. I saw my name, saw references to policy numbers and coverage amounts. My father kept talking, asking about work, about Julia, about our plans for Thanksgiving. I signed where he indicated, 3 separate places, my pen moving in that automatic way it does when you're doing something routine. He thanked me, slipped the folder back into his worn leather messenger bag, and bought me a second coffee. We talked for another 20 minutes about the Blazers season and his golf game. It was completely ordinary, completely forgettable, until it destroyed everything. The first hint that something was wrong came in March, 5 months after that cafe meeting. I was going through our mail on a Friday evening when I found a letter from a company called Cascade Financial Services. It was addressed to me, marked as a payment reminder for an account I didn't recognize. The letter referenced an account number and a past due amount of $3,822. I assumed it was junk mail or a scam, the kind of thing where they hope you'll call the number and give them your real information. I showed it to Julia, and she agreed it looked like phishing. "Probably got your name from some data breach," she said, tossing it in the recycling. I thought about reporting it, but got distracted by work deadlines and forgot. The second letter came 3 weeks later, more insistent, threatening to report to credit bureaus. This time I called the number listed, ready to tell them they had the wrong person. The customer service representative, a woman named Diane, asked for my social security number to verify my identity. Against my better judgment, I gave it to her. There was a pause, some keyboard clicking. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore, I have your account here. You're currently 63 days past due on your home equity line of credit payment. Your minimum payment is $1,200 per month." I felt my face flush with confusion and irritation. "I don't have a home equity line of credit," I said firmly. Diane sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested she dealt with this conversation daily. "Sir, according to our records, you opened this account on October 18th of last year. The loan was for $215,000, secured against your property at 4521 Maple Ridge Drive. You've made no payments since the account opened. Would you like to make a payment now to avoid further credit damage?" My hand holding the phone started to shake. October 18th. That was 3 days after I'd met my father at the cafe. "There's been a mistake," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "I never opened any account with your company. I need you to close this immediately." Diane's tone shifted to practiced patience. "I understand your concern, sir, but we have your signed application, your property deed information, and copies of your identification. If you believe this is fraud, you'll need to file a police report and dispute the loan through our fraud department. Would you like that number?" I wrote down the number she gave me, my handwriting shaky and illegible. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at my phone. Julia was at a book club meeting. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I pulled up my credit report on my laptop, something I hadn't checked in over a year. When it loaded, my chest tightened. My credit score had dropped from 782 to 611. There were multiple late payment marks, all from Cascade Financial Services, all for the same account number from the letter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Julia, watching the ceiling fan spin slowly in the darkness, trying to reconstruct that meeting with my father. Had I actually read what I signed? I'd signed 3 places, where the tabs were highlighted. Insurance papers. That's what he'd said. But had I actually seen the word insurance on the documents? I tried to remember the specific text, but it was like trying to grab smoke. I remembered the cafe, the scone, his reading glasses, but not the actual words on the page. At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went to my home office. I started searching for Cascade Financial Services online. They were legitimate, a regional lending company based in Seattle, specializing in home equity loans and reverse mortgages. Their website looked professional, with testimonials and accreditation badges. Not a scam operation. Not a mistake. At dawn, I called my father. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. "Dad, it's David. I need to talk to you about something urgent. Call me back as soon as you get this." I tried to keep my voice calm, not accusatory. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe his identity had been stolen too, and somehow I'd gotten tangled in it. I wanted there to be a reasonable explanation. He didn't call back that Saturday, or Sunday. I tried his cell phone 4 more times, left 3 voicemails. I called his condo landline, nothing. On Monday morning, I called out sick from work and drove to his place in Beaverton. His building was a modest 3-story complex with a gated entrance. I buzzed his unit. No answer. I waited until another resident came out, slipped in through the door, and went up to the 2nd floor. Unit 214. I knocked loudly, calling his name. A neighbor opened her door, an elderly woman with curlers in her hair. "If you're looking for Lenny, he's gone," she said matter-of-factly. "Saw him loading up a U-Haul on Sunday morning. Didn't even say goodbye, and we've been neighbors for 8 years. My mouth went dry. "Did he say where he was going?" She shook her head. Seemed in a hurry, though. Had some younger fellow helping him. They were done in under 2 hours. I thanked her and walked back to my car on legs that felt disconnected from my body. My father had disappeared. The same week, I discovered a fraudulent $200,000 loan in my name. A loan I'd apparently signed for. The implications crashed over me like cold water. I sat in my car in the parking lot and called Julia, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone. Julia came home from work early that Monday. I was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by printed credit reports, bank statements, and scribbled notes. She took one look at my face and knew something was catastrophically wrong. I explained everything, the letters, the phone call with Cascade Financial, my father's disappearance. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief to anger. "Call the police," she said when I finished. "Right now. This is fraud." But it wasn't that simple, as I learned when I went to the precinct that afternoon. The officer who took my report, a tired-looking man named James Carver with 23 years on the force, listened to my story and asked to see the loan documents. I didn't have them. I explained I'd signed what I thought were insurance papers, never saw anything about a loan. Officer Carver leaned back in his chair, studying me. "So your father asked you to sign something? You signed it without reading it, and now there's a loan you claim you didn't authorize?" I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "It's more complicated than that," I started, but he held up his hand. "Mr. Whitmore, from a legal standpoint, you signed the documents. If you can get copies from the lender and prove they're not what you agreed to, that's different. But right now, all I can do is file a report for potential fraud. You need a lawyer, not a cop." I hired an attorney the next day, a sharply dressed woman named Rachel Foster, who specialized in financial fraud cases. Her office was downtown, all glass and steel with a view of the Willamette River. She charged $350 an hour, money I didn't really have, but I was desperate. Rachel requested all the documentation from Cascade Financial Services, filing official requests under state disclosure laws. It took 2 weeks for the documents to arrive, a thick envelope delivered via certified mail. We went through them together in her conference room. The loan application was comprehensive, 10 pages long. My signature appeared in 8 different places. The document listed my income, my employment history, my social security number, my property details, all accurate. There were copies of my driver's license, a recent pay stub, and a property deed. "Where did he get all this?" Rachel asked, spreading the papers across the table. I felt sick looking at them. "The pay stub. I had one on my desk at home. He could have photographed it when he visited. The deed I keep in my file cabinet. My driver's license." I remembered my father had asked to borrow my wallet last Thanksgiving when his credit card was declined at dinner. Said he wanted to compare rewards programs or something. I'd handed it over without thinking. "Here's the problem," Rachel said, pointing to my signatures with her pen. "These are clearly your signatures. A handwriting analyst would confirm it. The document is notarized. See this stamp? That's a certified notary public, Pauline Eckhart, license number 89342, dated October 19th. She witnessed you sign this document. I stared at the notary stamp, that official-looking seal that gave everything the weight of truth. I never met any notary, I said. I signed what I thought were insurance forms in a cafe. There was no notary present. Rachel's expression hardened. Then the notary either falsified her records, or your father brought someone to impersonate you. Either way, it's notary fraud, which is a felony. We need to contact Pauline Eckhart and the Oregon Notary Public Administrator. She made notes on her legal pad, her writing fast and efficient. We also need to trace where the money went. $215,000 had to go somewhere. If we can prove your father diverted funds you never authorized him to access, we might have a case. But I'll be honest with you, David. This is an uphill battle. You signed the documents. The burden of proof is on you to demonstrate you were deceived about their nature. The money trail led nowhere good. Cascade Financial had wired the loan proceeds to an account at Northwest Community Bank in my father's name. From there, the money had been withdrawn in increments over 6 weeks. Cash withdrawals, wire transfers to accounts I couldn't trace, payments to credit cards I'd never heard of. By the time I started investigating, the account was empty, closed 3 months earlier. My father had vanished. I tried his cell phone daily, disconnected. I contacted his few friends, his golf buddies, his former co-workers from the municipal water department where he'd worked before retirement. No one had heard from him. His condo was listed for rent through a property management company. When I called them, they said Leonard Whitmore had broken his lease, paid the penalty, and left no forwarding address. It was like he'd evaporated. Meanwhile, Cascade Financial Services didn't care about my explanations. They wanted their money, $1,200 per month, plus the accumulating interest. Each missed payment drove my credit score lower. I was now at 580, barely above subprime. Julia and I had been planning to buy a new car that summer. Not anymore. We'd been talking about her going back to school for her master's degree. That dream evaporated too. Every financial plan we'd made was suddenly impossible. The notary, Pauline Eckhart, turned out to be my father's neighbor in the condo building, the same woman with curlers who'd told me he'd moved out. When Rachel's investigator tracked her down, Pauline initially claimed she remembered notarizing my signature. But under pressure, her story fell apart. She admitted my father had paid her $500 to notarize documents without verifying my identity. She claimed he told her it was for a family trust, something informal, that I'd already signed and just needed the official stamp. He was my neighbor, she said in her statement. I trusted him. He seemed like such a nice man. Rachel filed a complaint with the state, and Pauline Eckhart's notary license was revoked. She faced potential criminal charges for notary fraud. But that didn't solve my problem. The loan was still valid. The documents were still signed in my actual handwriting. A fraudulent notarization didn't invalidate the underlying contract. It just added another layer of crime to the situation. I was still on the hook for over $200,000 I'd never seen, never spent, never wanted. And my father, the only person who could explain or fix this, was gone. By May, I was drowning. Cascade Financial had started foreclosure proceedings. I received a formal notice that if I didn't bring the loan current, $18,000 in missed payments plus fees, they would begin the legal process to seize my house. Julia and I fought constantly, not screaming matches, but worse, cold, silent dinners where we couldn't look at each other. She never said, "I told you so," but I could feel it hanging between us. I should have read what I signed. I should have questioned my father. I should have protected us. Our marriage counselor, Dr. Yolanda Singh, tried to help us navigate the betrayal and stress, but how do you counsel someone through financial ruin caused by their own parent? You're angry at yourself, Dr. Singh said during one session, but you need to direct that anger appropriately. Your father exploited your trust. That's on him, not you. But it didn't feel that way. I'd signed the papers. My negligence had made this possible. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus at work. My boss pulled me aside in June and said my performance was slipping, asked if everything was okay at home. I lied and said Julia and I were fine, just stressed about some family stuff. I couldn't tell him the truth, that my career, my marriage, my entire life was circling the drain because I'd been too trusting and too stupid. The break came from an unexpected source. In late June, I received a phone call from a woman named Christine Landry. She introduced herself as a fraud investigator with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm calling because your father, Leonard Whitmore, is a person of interest in a multi-state investigation. I understand you've been a victim of his activities?" I nearly dropped the phone. FBI, multi-state investigation. Christine explained that my father wasn't just a con artist. He was part of a sophisticated fraud ring that had been operating for at least 5 years. The home equity scheme he'd run on me was just one variation. He'd also convinced elderly clients at his former workplace to invest in fake municipal bonds, had forged documents to access a deceased veteran's benefits, and had impersonated a financial advisor to bilk widows out of their life savings. "We've identified at least 19 victims across Oregon, Washington, and California," Christine said. "The total fraud exceeds $4 million. Your case helped us identify the notary fraud pattern. When we investigated Pauline Eckhart, we found she'd notarized documents for your father involving 3 other victims. That gave us the thread we needed." The FBI had been tracking my father for 8 months, since before he'd even fled. They knew about the U-Haul, the closed bank accounts, the fake names he'd been using. They had surveillance photos of him in Reno, using an alias. They'd frozen several accounts tied to shell companies he'd created, and they wanted my help. Christine came to my house 2 days later, accompanied by another agent named Thomas Wiley. They sat in my living room, their badges clipped to their belts, and laid out the scope of my father's operation. It was staggering. He'd created fake investment portfolios, forged letters from banks, impersonated attorneys and CPAs. He'd targeted people who trusted him, co-workers, neighbors, his own son. The home equity scheme was particularly cruel, Agent Wiley said, sliding photos across my coffee table. He did this to 4 people, made them think they were signing insurance forms or trust documents, then took out equity loans without their knowledge. You were actually the largest one. The other 3 were smaller properties, between 80 and 120,000. But the pattern is identical. Same cafe meetings, same manila folder, same notary involved. Looking at those photos of strangers, a couple in their 60s, a single mother, a retired teacher, who'd been victimized the same way I had, something in me shifted. This wasn't just about my stupidity or my failure to read fine print. This was calculated predation by someone who'd weaponized trust. The FBI had a plan. They'd tracked my father to an apartment in Henderson, Nevada, where he was living under the name Gerald Buchanan. He'd dyed his hair, grown a beard, but facial recognition software had flagged him at a casino ATM. They were coordinating with Nevada authorities to make the arrest, but they wanted statements from all the victims first, detailed accounts that could be used in prosecution. I spent 6 hours in a federal building in downtown Portland, giving my statement to a stenographer while Christine and Agent Wiley asked questions. I walked through every detail I could remember: the phone call, the cafe meeting, what the papers looked like, what my father had said. They showed me documents seized from a storage unit he'd rented, and I identified the manila folder, the same worn leather messenger bag. "Do you want to be present when we arrest him?" Christine asked toward the end of the session. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see his face when the handcuffs went on. But another part, the part that was still his son, still remembered him teaching me to ride a bike and attending my high school graduation, couldn't stomach it. "No," I said finally. "Just tell me when it's done." 3 days later, on a Wednesday morning in mid-July, they arrested Leonard Whitmore as he left a Whole Foods with groceries. He didn't resist, didn't run. According to the report Christine sent me, he just sighed and said, "I figured you'd find me eventually." The arrest made regional news. "Portland man arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme," read the headline in the Oregonian. There was a photo of my father being led into a courthouse in Las Vegas, his hands cuffed in front of him, his expression blank. Julia showed me the article on her tablet. We were sitting at the breakfast table, the same table where I'd first read that letter from Cascade Financial 4 months earlier. "How does this help us?" she asked. It was a fair question. The FBI freezing his accounts didn't make my loan disappear. Cascade Financial still wanted their money. The foreclosure proceedings were still moving forward, but Christine had connected me with a victim's advocate attorney named Michael Brennan, who specialized in cases exactly like mine. Michael was in his 50s, with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades fighting financial institutions. "Here's what we're going to do," he said in our first meeting. "We're going to prove that Cascade Financial Services failed their due diligence obligations. Oregon law requires lenders to verify the borrower's intent and understanding when processing home equity loans. They didn't do that. They accepted a fraudulent notarization. They never contacted you directly to confirm the loan terms. They never verified your employment independently. They were negligent, possibly willfully so, because they wanted the loan on their books. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this." Michael filed a lawsuit against Cascade Financial in August. The legal argument was complex, but the core was simple. The lender had been so eager to make the loan that they'd ignored obvious red flags. Why hadn't they contacted me at my workplace to verify employment? Why hadn't they required an in-person appraisal of the property with me present? Why had they accepted a notarization from someone who lived in the same building as the co-borrower? "They cut corners," Michael argued in court filings, "and when those corners involved my client's life savings and home, they became liable for the damages caused by their negligence." The case dragged on for months. Discovery revealed that Cascade Financial had a pattern of sloppy verification processes. They'd had 3 other loans go bad in similar circumstances in the previous 2 years. The company's underwriting department was understaffed, and loan officers were incentivized to process as many loans as possible to meet quarterly targets. My loan had been approved in less than 48 hours, with minimal documentation review. A forensic accountant named Robert Klein testified that standard industry practice would have required at least 2 direct contacts with me and an in-person property inspection. Cascade had done neither. The turning point came in November, 9 months after that first letter had arrived. My father's case went to trial in federal court in Las Vegas. I didn't attend, but Christine kept me updated. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: forged documents, victim testimony, financial records showing the money trail. My father's defense attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, claiming Leonard had developed a gambling addiction that impaired his judgment. But the prosecution showed evidence of careful planning, shell companies created years in advance, fake credentials manufactured with precision. This wasn't the work of a confused elderly man. This was organized crime. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on 18 counts of wire fraud, 6 counts of identity theft, 4 counts of forgery, and 11 counts of theft. The judge, a woman named Honorable Margaret Chu, sentenced him to 23 years in federal prison. Given his age, it was effectively a life sentence. She was particularly harsh in her remarks. "Mr. Whitmore, you didn't target strangers. You targeted people who trusted you, co-workers, neighbors, your own son. You weaponized human decency for profit. The damage you caused extends beyond dollars. You shattered families, ruined retirements, and destroyed the fundamental belief that we can trust those closest to us." I read the transcript of the sentencing alone in my home office late one night. Julia was already asleep. When I got to the part where my father was given the opportunity to address the court, I had to stop and breathe. He'd stood up, looked at the gallery of victims and their families, and said, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. I got in over my head, and instead of being honest, I kept digging. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope someday you can all move on." It felt hollow, scripted. But there was a part of me, the part that was still his son, that wanted to believe he meant it, the part that remembered him at my wedding, tears in his eyes as he walked me down the aisle to meet Julia. The part that remembered him taking me fishing when I was 8, teaching me to bait a hook, his patience endless. That part wanted to believe the father I'd loved had been real, and this criminal was some aberration, some terrible mistake. But Michael Brennan had taught me to think differently. "Your father made choices," he'd said. "Hundreds of small choices over years, each one prioritizing himself over everyone else. The man you loved might have existed once, but he chose to become someone else. You don't owe loyalty to who he chose to become." The lawsuit against Cascade Financial settled in December. They agreed to forgive the entire loan, all $215,000 plus accumulated interest and fees, and to pay me an additional $85,000 in damages for emotional distress and credit repair costs. They didn't admit wrongdoing, but they acknowledged their underwriting process had failed to meet their own internal standards. Michael took 30% as his fee, but I didn't begrudge him a cent. He'd saved my house, my credit, my marriage. The settlement also required Cascade to implement new verification procedures for all home equity loans, including mandatory in-person borrower interviews and independent employment verification. My case had been combined with the 3 other victims of the same scheme, and we collectively forced policy changes that would protect future borrowers. It felt like something meaningful salvaged from the wreckage. The FBI's asset forfeiture team recovered about $800,000 from my father's various accounts and shell companies. That money was divided among all 19 victims, proportionally based on their losses. I received approximately $90,000, which went straight into rebuilding our savings and paying off the legal fees not covered by the settlement. By January, 1 year after this nightmare began, things were starting to stabilize. My credit score was slowly climbing back up. It took months to remove all the negative marks, even with court orders and documentation. Julia and I were still in counseling, but we were talking again, really talking, about trust and forgiveness and how to move forward. She'd been angrier than I'd realized, not just at my father, but at me for being so naive. "I needed to be angry at you," she admitted in one session with Dr. Singh. "Because being angry at your father felt pointless. He was a stranger to me. But you were supposed to protect us, protect our life together, and you didn't." It stung, but it was fair. I had failed to protect us. I'd let my father's charm and my own complacency blind me to basic caution. Dr. Singh helped us work through the resentment, helped Julia understand that my trust in my father hadn't been stupidity. It had been the normal expectation of a son toward a parent. And she helped me understand that Julia's anger came from fear, from the terror of watching everything we'd built almost disappear. Slowly, we found our way back to each other. Not to who we'd been before, that innocence was gone, but to something harder, more resilient. I visited my father once, about 14 months after his arrest. He was being held at a federal correctional institution in Southern California, awaiting transfer to his permanent facility. I'm still not entirely sure why I went. Maybe I needed to see him in person, to confirm that the man in the orange jumpsuit was really the same person who'd raised me. Maybe I needed closure, whatever that means. Julia didn't want me to go, but she didn't try to stop me. "If you need to do this, do it," she said. "Just don't let him manipulate you again." The visiting room was exactly like you see in movies. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a thick glass partition, phones on either side. My father looked smaller somehow, diminished. His hair had gone completely white, and he'd lost weight. When he picked up the phone and saw me, his eyes filled with tears. "David," he said, his voice cracking through the receiver. "I didn't think you'd come." I didn't know what to say, so I just looked at him. Finally, I managed. "Why did you do it? To me, specifically. I would have helped you if you'd asked. If you needed money, if you were in trouble, I would have tried to help." He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, The tears were spilling down his cheeks. "I know you would have," he said. "That's why it was so easy. You trusted me completely. You wouldn't have questioned anything I told you." The honesty was somehow worse than a lie would have been. He wasn't even trying to deny or excuse it. "I had a gambling problem," he continued. "Started small, casinos on weekends, but it got out of control. I owed people money, bad people. I needed a big score to get clean, to pay them off and start over. I told myself I'd pay you back, that I'd get lucky and win it all back and you'd never even know. But it didn't work that way. It never works that way." I thought about all the times he'd called over the years, asking about our lives, about the house, about Julia's job and my career. I'd thought he was being a caring father. Now I wondered if he'd been gathering intelligence, figuring out our financial situation, calculating what he could take. "Did you ever actually care about me?" I asked. "Or was I always just a mark?" He flinched like I'd hit him. "I loved you, David. I love you. That's the truth. But love doesn't stop addiction, doesn't stop desperation. I did terrible things to people I loved because I was weak. That doesn't make it better. It probably makes it worse." We sat in silence for a long moment, the phone receivers pressed to our ears, that glass partition between us representing something much larger than physical distance. I thought about forgiveness, about whether it was something I owed him or something I needed for myself. Rachel, my attorney, had once told me that forgiveness wasn't about the person who hurt you. It was about releasing yourself from carrying their crime forward. But sitting there, looking at the man who'd taught me to throw a baseball and who'd also stolen my house, I didn't feel ready to release anything. Maybe someday. Maybe never. "I can't forgive you right now," I said finally. "Maybe that makes me a bad person, or a bad son, but I can't. What you did to me, to Julia, to all those other people, it broke something. I don't know if it can be fixed." He nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "I understand," he said. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad you got the house back, and I'm sorry. I know that doesn't help, but I am." The guard called time a few minutes later. I hung up the phone, stood up, and walked toward the exit without looking back. I haven't visited him since. I haven't written. I don't know if I ever will. The strangest part of the whole experience has been how it's changed the way I see the world. I used to be the person who assumed good intentions, who gave people the benefit of the doubt, who believed that trust was a virtue. Now I read every document, question every phone call, verify every unexpected email. Julia jokes that I've become paranoid, but she knows it's not really a joke. When her brother asked me to co-sign a car loan last fall, I said no without hesitation, and the look of hurt on his face, like I didn't trust family, cut deep. But I didn't trust family. Not anymore. Not the way I used to. I explained to him what had happened with my father, and he understood intellectually, but I could tell he felt rejected. Trust, I've learned, is like glass. Once shattered, the pieces never fit back together quite right. You can glue them, you can approximate the original shape, but the cracks remain visible forever. At work, I've become the cautious one, the person who asks for written confirmation of verbal agreements, who documents everything in email. Some colleagues find it tedious, but I've also caught 2 instances of miscommunication that could have cost the company serious money, and my boss now sees my attention to detail as an asset rather than anxiety. Julia and I finally started trying for a baby last spring, 2 years after this whole nightmare began. It felt like reclaiming something, asserting that we were going to build a future despite the past. She got pregnant in June, and we're expecting a daughter in February. We've already decided she'll never know her grandfather, never hear stories about him, never wonder why there are no photos of him in our house. It feels harsh, erasing someone from our family history. But what would I tell her? How do you explain that the man who should have been her grandfather chose instead to be a criminal? When she's older, if she asks, we'll tell her the truth in age-appropriate ways. But we won't romanticize it. Won't pretend he was a good man who made mistakes. He was a man who made choices, and those choices had consequences. Sometimes I still dream about that cafe meeting, the one where I signed away my house without knowing it. In the dreams, I'm sitting at that same table, the folder in front of me, but I can't make myself read the words. They swim and blur no matter how hard I focus. My father is talking, his voice warm and reassuring, but I can't make out what he's saying. I reach for the pen, and that's when I wake up, my heart racing, my hands shaking. Julia has learned to recognize the signs. She'll put her hand on my shoulder, remind me to breathe, tell me it's over. And it is over, mostly. But trauma doesn't follow logical timelines. Last month, I got a letter from one of the other victims, the retired teacher who'd lost $98,000 in a similar scheme. Her name was Dorothy, and she was 71 years old when my father convinced her to sign documents she thought were for refinancing her mortgage. She'd lost her house before the FBI caught him, had to move in with her daughter's family. The settlement from Cascade Financial had helped, but she hadn't been able to buy another house, not at her age with her reduced income. She wrote to thank me for filing the lawsuit, for forcing policy changes that might prevent this from happening to others. "You turned your pain into protection for strangers," she wrote. "That takes courage I'm not sure I have." I wrote back, telling her that courage had nothing to do with it. I'd been angry and desperate and lucky enough to find good lawyers. But her letter stayed with me, tucked in my desk drawer. Because maybe there was something to what she said. Maybe the only way to survive being a victim was to refuse to let the victimization define you, to transmute the damage into something that prevented future damage. It didn't erase what happened. It didn't make my father less guilty or my own naivety less costly. But it made the experience mean something beyond personal tragedy. The project manager at my company recently asked me to lead a training session on contract review and risk assessment. I agreed, though public speaking still makes me nervous. Standing in front of 20 colleagues, I talked about the importance of reading every document you sign, of never trusting verbal explanations over written terms, of verifying the identity and authority of anyone requesting financial information. I didn't tell them my story. That felt too personal, too raw, but I used hypothetical examples that were barely disguised versions of what happened to me. Afterward, a younger employee, a recent college graduate named Alex, came up to me. "That was really helpful," he said. "My dad asked me to co-sign on something last week, and I almost just did it without looking. Now I'm going to actually read it first." I nodded, trying not to show how much that simple statement affected me. If even one person avoided getting hurt because I shared what I'd learned, then maybe Dorothy was right. Maybe the pain did become protection. Julia and I talk sometimes about whether we'll ever really be past it. Past the betrayal, the financial terror, the months of fighting and fear. We're in a good place now. Better than good, honestly. The settlement money let us pay off the mortgage entirely, so we own the house outright. We've rebuilt our savings. Her master's degree program starts next fall. We're having a baby. By any objective measure, we've recovered. But there are moments, when someone mentions their parents, when I see a manila folder, when I walk past that cafe in Beaverton, where it all comes rushing back, the shame, the anger, the disbelief. Those moments are getting less frequent, less intense, but they're still there. "I think that's just part of it now," Julia said one night when I told her about freezing up in the coffee shop. "It happened. It changed us. We don't get to pretend it didn't. But we get to decide whether it keeps hurting us or whether we integrate it and move on." She's right, as usual. Integration. Making the scar part of your skin rather than an open wound. I'm working on that. 3 months ago, I received notice that my father's appeal had been denied. He'll serve his full sentence with no reduction. He'll be 94 years old if he lives to see release, which statistically he won't. That notice sat on my desk for a week before I opened it. When I finally did, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, not anger, just emptiness where those emotions used to be. He'd become a stranger, someone I used to know, someone who hurt me a long time ago. Maybe that's its own kind of forgiveness, not absolving him, but releasing the expectation that he owes me anything or that his fate matters to my life. He made his choices. I'm making mine. And my choice is to focus on the family I'm building with Julia, the daughter who's going to arrive in a few months, the life we're creating that has nothing to do with him. Patricia Nguyen, the bank manager who first showed me those loan documents, reached out last fall. Cascade Financial had gone through a complete restructuring after our lawsuit, and she'd been promoted to a regional compliance position. She wanted to thank me for forcing the changes, said the new verification procedures had already stopped 3 potentially fraudulent loans. "You probably don't want to hear this," she said, "but you did the company a favor. We were building our business on shoddy foundations, and your case made us fix it before something worse happened." I appreciated the sentiment, though it was hard to feel grateful for being the cautionary tale that saved a financial institution from itself. The last time I checked, there's an entire section in Cascade Financial's training manual called The Whitmore Case, detailing what went wrong and what safeguards are now in place. New employees study my fraud as an example of the human cost of negligent underwriting. I'm anonymized in their materials, just the victim or the borrower, but I know it's me. Part of me finds it darkly funny that my worst experience has become a corporate lesson plan. Another part finds it oddly meaningful. My suffering became data, and that data is protecting other people. It's not redemption exactly, but it's something. Michael Brennan, my attorney, still sends me a Christmas card every year. Last year's included a note. "Thank you for trusting me with your case. Cases like yours remind me why I became a lawyer." I appreciated that more than he probably knows. When you're drowning in legal complexity and financial disaster, having someone competent and compassionate in your corner makes all the difference between survival and total collapse. I've referred 4 other fraud victims to him over the past 2 years. He's helped every one of them recover at least part of what was stolen. Fighting back works, but only if you have the resources and the stubbornness to see it through. Our daughter arrived on February 6th, 3 weeks early but healthy. We named her Sophia. Holding her in the hospital, watching Julia sleep after 18 hours of labor, I felt the full weight of what my father had almost taken from us. If the foreclosure had gone through, if we'd lost the house and our savings, if the stress had shattered our marriage, Sophia wouldn't exist. This moment, this perfect sleeping infant in my arms, would never have happened. That's what fraud steals beyond money. It steals futures. It steals possibilities. It steals the life you were supposed to have. We got ours back through luck and lawyers and the FBI, but I think about Dorothy, about the other victims who didn't recover everything they lost. The lives that didn't get lived, because someone's greed consumed the resources that would have made them possible. When Sophia is older, old enough to understand concepts like trust and betrayal and consequences, I'll tell her what happened. I'll tell her that her grandfather wasn't a good man, that he hurt people including her father, that he's in prison and will die there. I'll tell her that people can seem trustworthy and still be dangerous, that love and exploitation can coexist in the same person, that you have to protect yourself even from family. It's a harsh lesson for a child, but it's the truth, and I'd rather give her hard truths she can use than comforting lies that leave her vulnerable. Julia's brother did eventually get his car loan, through a credit union that didn't require a cosigner. Our relationship recovered from that awkward moment when I said no. He understands now, I think, that my refusal wasn't about him. It was about me, about boundaries I had to set to feel safe again. We had dinner with him and his wife last weekend, and his 3-year-old son played with Sophia, gentle and curious. Watching them, I thought about the family we're all building, the next generation that will carry forward our choices and our scars and our small victories. My nephew won't know his great-grandfather either. The crime will be a story, distant and abstract, rather than lived trauma. Maybe that's how healing works across generations. The pain becomes history, loses its sharp edges, transforms into wisdom or caution, or just a story about why Uncle David always reads the fine print. Looking back now, almost 3 years since that meeting in the CAFO C, where I signed away my house, the hardest thing to accept isn't the betrayal. It's how easily it happened. How my entire financial life hung on a moment of inattention, on trust I gave without thinking, because that's what sons do with fathers. There was no dramatic confrontation, no warning signs I ignored. Just a folder, a pen, 3 signatures, and 400 days of consequences that nearly destroyed everything I'd built. But we survived it. Julia and I, together, survived it. The house is still standing. Our marriage is intact, stronger in some ways for having weathered the storm. Sophia is sleeping in the next room, oblivious to how close she came to never existing. My credit score is back above 700. The foreclosure notice that once sat on my kitchen table is now in a box in the garage, a souvenir of the worst time in my life and proof that we made it through. Some people ask if I have any contact with my father. I don't. The last time I saw him was that visit to the federal prison, and I have no plans to go back. He writes letters sometimes. They arrive every few months, forwarded through my attorney. I don't open them. Julia asked once if I wanted to know what they say, and I told her no. Whatever justifications or apologies or explanations he wants to offer, they don't matter anymore. He's serving his time. I'm living my life. Those are separate things, and I intend to keep them that way. If he lives long enough to see parole, I'll cross that bridge then. But I suspect he won't. The sentencing judge was right. 23 years for a 71-year-old man is a life sentence. He'll die in prison, and I'll get a call someday from the Bureau of Prisons or the coroner, and I don't know how I'll feel when that happens. Right now, sitting here in my home office while my wife and daughter sleep, I can't imagine feeling much of anything. What I do know is that I'm grateful. Grateful for Julia's strength and patience. Grateful for lawyers and FBI agents who did their jobs with competence and compassion. Grateful for the flaws in Cascade Financial's system that gave us legal ground to fight. Grateful for the other victims who came forward and helped build the case against my father. Grateful that our daughter will grow up in a house that's fully ours, with no hidden debts or buried secrets. Grateful that I learned these lessons without losing everything, even though it felt like I would. Grateful that when I sign documents now, I read every single word, and that hypervigilance has already saved me from 2 scams and 1 expensive misunderstanding. I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, but I can't pretend it didn't change me, mostly for the better. I'm more careful, yes, more cynical maybe, but also more appreciative of the things that remain solid, the people who prove trustworthy, the moments where trust is earned and rewarded rather than exploited. My father taught me that lesson the hardest way possible. I'm raising my daughter to learn it more gently, but just as thoroughly. Because the world is full of people who will see your trust as weakness, your love as leverage. The only defense is boundaries, documentation, and the willingness to walk away from anyone, even family, who proves they can't be trusted. If you made it this far through my story, I hope you never need to use any of what I learned. I hope your family is honest, your trust well placed, your signatures only ever on documents you fully understand. But if that's not the case, if you're reading this because something similar happened to you, then know this. You can survive it. You can fight back. You can recover. It takes time and money and strength you didn't know you had, but you can make it through to the other side. The house I almost lost is where I'm sitting right now. The marriage that nearly broke is stronger than ever. The future that seemed destroyed is unfolding better than I ever expected. My father tried to steal my life. Instead, he gave me a different one, harder one, more cautious, but genuinely mine in a way the old life never was. I wouldn't thank him for it, but I wouldn't trade what I've built from the wreckage for the innocence I had before. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.